ES Audio.
Hello, welcome to the Evening Standard Theatre Podcast. I'm Nick Curtis, the Standard's Chief Theatre Critic.
I'm Nancy Durrant, Culture Editor.
And I'm Nick Clark, the Deputy Culture Editor.
This week we're coming to you from Wyndham's Theatre in the heart of London's West End.
Well, we're by the stage door.
Coming up on today's show, we'll be reviewing Black Superhero by Danny Lee Wynter, which is on at the Royal Court, starring Emmy Award winner Dyllón Burnside from Pose on Netflix.
Plus, for our second review, we'll be discussing Sea Creatures, now on at the Hampstead Theatre Downstairs. That's by Cordelia Lynn and directed by James Macdonald.
And we'll be joined by Hamilton's Giles Terera to chat about his play that he is also starring in, The Meaning of Zong, which is on at the Barbican for a blink and you'll miss it run from April the 20th.
Our story takes place at exactly the same time as Hamilton takes place. So I didn't start it that long after Lynn started his journey. It was interesting when I came to do it, I knew a lot about the period.
Further touring dates coming out for that show too. Right, guys, can we go inside please? It's actually freezing.
Yes, please.
Not off.
We're here at the Wyndham's Theatre, currently home to Oklahoma, which you need the exclamation mark for. We've got the best seats in the house for this podcast.
We do indeed.
Sat right in the middle of the stalls. I think Oklahoma's on until September, is that right?
Yeah, it's booking till September 2nd.
We're in Wyndham's, as we said, which was built in 1898 by the actor-manager Charles Wyndham. 8 years before Oklahoma is set, because the action of the musical takes place in 1906, when Oklahoma is about to become a state. It's about the dynamics between farmers and cowboys, but it's more about the sexual dynamics between cowboys and cowgirls, I think it's safe to say. This was called the Sexy Oklahoma in New York, which I think is an awful phrase, but it's kind of apt. It
won deconstructed.
It is deconstructed, but very powerfully so. It won our Best Musical Award at the Evening Standard Theatre Awards last year, and won Best Musical Performance in a very crowded field, because there were only a number of people in this who could have won, for Patrick Vale, who has been in this show since its first iteration 15 years ago as a student production at Bard College.
Wow.
He's not sick of it yet.
He's not sick of it yet. He does say this will probably be his last crack at it. I mean, 15 years in a part is long enough for anyone, isn't it, really? Unless you're Ken Barlow in Coronation Street, I suppose. Anyway, there we go. Wyndham's Theatre, lovely, beautiful theatre.
Stunning.
It was the second one built by the actor-manager Charles Wyndham after the Criterion, where we were last week for our podcast.
We're in the pocket of Big Wyndham.
We're in the pocket of Big Wyndham, and it's one of 6 West End theatres designed by W.G.R. Sprague, possibly the sort of one of the 3 most famous West End architects, along with Frank Matcham and the other one, whose name currently escapes me.
That's all right.
Right, so let's kick off with our first review. It's Black Superhero by Danny Lee Wynter, directed by Daniel Evans at the Royal Court Theatre.
So Black Superhero at the Royal Court is the first play to be written by actor Danny Lee Wynter, terrific actor, in which he initially took the lead role as well, but rather unfortunately this opened while I was away on holiday, so both Nick Clark and I only saw the stand-in. You saw him more recently than I did. He was still holding a script when I saw it.
Wow.
Well, should we say first, yes, last week Danny put on social media, and it's on the Royal Court website, that he decided to step down for personal reasons. So Lewis Brown took over the role and will be in the role until April 29th, the end of the run. Right.
And does it very well, I think. I mean, even though he had the script in his hand when I saw him do it, I was very impressed. He'd been in it, I think, 3 days by that point.
It's amazing. I saw him on Tuesday and he didn't have a script in his hand. I think it may have been his first performance without it. And he was brilliant. There is something about, obviously, an audience supporting someone who has to step into the breach at the last minute. But actually, you wouldn't know unless you'd been told. He was absolutely superb. He really brought the character huge amounts of pathos, I think. Yeah. It was a fabulous performance.
It's the sort of 42nd Street syndrome, isn't it? You started out as a member of the chorus, but you're coming back a star. And audiences do love that. You're absolutely right.
It was really lovely, because when he went off at the end, I was sat quite near the wings, and I could hear them all cheering, and there was a little round of "For He's a Jolly Good Fellow," and I assumed it was because of some reason of him maybe being off book for the first night, or one of the early performances, and he absolutely deserved it, I think.
Yeah. I haven't seen this show, it's only you guys, so what's it about?
It is about a group of black male gay actors who are in a friendship group, but a slightly fraught one, which has some sort of erotic permeability, shall we say, to it. There's quite a lot of discussion about whether relationships are open or closed, and where friendships stray into.
And some of the actors are struggling and some of them are doing much better. And the sort of centrepiece is a guy called King, who is sort of landed a role of a big Marvel-style superhero. So he tends to draw in all the attention, certainly from outsiders, but also from David and everyone else, and David sort of falls in love with him. What it turns out quite clearly is the king is not a superhero. He's someone who enjoys the attention, and as much attention as he can get.
Yeah, he's played by Dyllón Burnside, the star of Netflix's Pose and Dharma Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story.
He is. It was such a delight to see him on a London stage, because I loved Pose. He was brilliant.
He's very, very charismatic, isn't he?
Charismatic.
And part of the dynamic on stage is the fact that he and Raheem, the other friend character, are these gorgeous, hyper-worked out individuals, and David is a bit of a schlub, isn't he? Who's got not a terribly successful acting career. He's staying with his sister, who is basically wants him to move out because she wants to start a family.
Shout out to her, Rashenda Sandor, who's been in The Line of Duty and Small Axe. She's brilliant as David's sister Sid.
Yeah. He has some daddy issues, it's safe to say, there, but he has some abandonment issues, and he has some dark secret in his past, some addiction occurrence that everybody alludes to and nobody is never actually entirely fully explained.
This relationship with King sort of leads him to, because it as things go wrong and he spirals out of control.
I think it's very clearly a first play. I'm saying this as delicately as I possibly can. A lot of it felt quite familiar, really. A lot of it felt quite talky. A lot of it felt very issue-based and sort of rather mechanically working through issues. Specifically about where friendships and romances blur into one another. Yeah,
it's sort of split. What I liked about this play, it really got the dynamic of male friendship quite well, quite bantery, except on the moments when it goes really polemic-y. And it's a play that wants to talk about big issues, but it feels like it doesn't quite meld them with the characters. The characters talk at each other. They sort of espouse these big theories to each other in a way that I just thought maybe didn't ring possibly that true.
I feel like that's one of the hardest things, isn't it? It's like you've got something important to say, and if you were drunk and like really controlling the room with everybody else like tired on the sofa, then you might well talk like that, but otherwise actually it never happens.
Yeah,
you never do. But I think that's so difficult to get right.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, the problem is it is all text and no subtext, and certainly in those cases there's a moment, it's interesting, he talks about seeing King for the first time on a tube and he's reading Pinter plays. I thought, well, actually it's interesting that he brings up Pinter, because a Pinter play could not be more different.
Yes, yeah, that's true. Can I just on a side note say I'd love to see your quote really polemic-y outside the Royal Court.
I mean, you could just stick it outside the Royal Court.
You could stick it out. That's true, just leave it there. Just change the name of the show as it around it each
I left
time.
my dictionary at home. Okay, guys.
Anyway, it's I wonder what it would have been like to have seen Danny Lee Wynter performing in it. It's obviously a very personal project for him. I've no idea how much or if any of it is autobiographical, but it feels like it's a play by an actor about what it's like to struggle as an actor, and I feel we've seen quite a lot of those plays over the years.
There's also a note on journalists as well.
There's a note on journalists.
A little squirmy about, I've got to say.
Yes, you're right. There's the character King has an interview with a journalist who doesn't want to talk to him about the work, which is a fairly crappy superhero franchise, clearly, isn't it? I mean, any superhero called Craw is going to stick in your craw a little bit, I think. And this guy just wants to sort of attack him about where he stands on issues and those sort of things. And yes, I think both of us were probably thinking, yeah, those are the questions I'd have asked.
I mean, there was a lot to like as well about this show. I've got to say, certainly the dynamic between the actors, but the set was very impressive, I thought. Joanna Scotcher and the lighting design by Ryan Day, absolutely fabulous. There's an incredible set piece that I thought with sand, which I really loved, and I won't spoil it for anyone, but it's a really nice theational moment.
That's true. It's a great coup de théâtre, that one, while I'm being really pretentiously. But I have to say, I love the black superhero costume as well. I mean, you can't go wrong with a great sort of helmet, headpiece, and a long cloak, can you?
No, and it's well directed by, Daniel Evans. You know you're in safe hands with Daniel Evans.
You do know you're in safe hands with Daniel Evans, yes. Yeah, he's about to jointly take over the RSC.
That's right.
Having run Chichester for quite a long period of time. It'll be interesting to see what he does next, Danny Lee Wynter. I think he's a tremendous actor. He was wonderful in The Normal Heart.
And there's definitely something there. I was never bored. I found it interesting all the way through. I just thought, if you can get a bit more subtext in there and maybe just make that script a little bit funnier, I think.
I think the theme of this week's podcast maybe could have done with another draft.
Right, we're going to a quick ad break.
After this, we'll be joined by Giles Terera to talk about his new play, The Meaning of Zong, at the Barbican Theatre.
Yes, and in the meantime, why not give our podcast a rating and hit subscribe? Guys, do you think the bar's open yet?
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Danny Mays, and you're listening to the Evening Standard Theatre Podcast.
Welcome back to the Evening Standard Theatre Podcast. With me this week is Giles Terera, the writer, co-director and star of The Meaning of Zong, which is at the Barbican. Giles, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So tell me a little bit about, tell the listeners what The Meaning of Zong is.
The Meaning of Zong is a true story. It's about a black man in London in 1783 who hears about this atrocity which has happened on board a British slave ship in the Caribbean, and he tries to do something about it. It's the story of him enlisting a man who at the time was the sort of one-man abolitionist, Granville Sharp, in London, and the two of them set about trying to bring this story to the attention of the British public, and in doing so, they kind of kickstart or help to kickstart the beginning of the abolitionist movement in the UK. And also in doing so, in our telling of the story, the sort of hero, the main character of the story, Olaudah Equiano, inadvertently refines himself on the journey of trying to bring about social justice.
Right. The story of the Zong is pretty horrific, isn't it? We should probably unpack what actually happened.
Yeah.
Somewhat.
A British slave ship in 1781 is heading over from the west coast of Africa to Jamaica. And the voyage is a disaster from the outset. There's a massively inexperienced crew, a very inexperienced captain. The ship is overloaded with far more human beings than would normally be on a ship of that size. And when they get to Jamaica, because they're so late and because sickness has kind of ripped through the entirety of the vessel, what they decide to do, the captain, is to throw some of the enslaved Africans into the sea so that they can claim the insurance on them when they get back to Jamaica, because the whole of the British slave trade was basically built on insurance.
Yes.
So that's what happens. Over 3 days, a massacre happens where they kill 132 of the Africans and then come back to England, to Liverpool, and try and claim the insurance. The insurers refuse, and then it ends up in court here at Guildhall, and the jury find in favour of the ship's owners. So about £3,000 is paid out in insurance for these murders. And at that point, the insurers appeal, and then the appeal hearing, it happens at Westminster Hall in Parliament Square, modern Parliament Square. At that point, Olaudah Equiano hears about this incident. He goes to Granville Sharp and says, we have to do something about this. So the two of them set about against almost all of sort of the popular opinion of the time. They are sort of pushing against that. So in many ways, for me, yes, it's a story which happened a couple of hundred years ago, but to me, it's got massive resonances with stories now, especially when we look in all of our headlines are about black and brown people in boats and what we need to do about it.
Yeah.
Our story takes place at exactly the same time as Hamilton takes place. It just takes place over on this side of the Atlantic instead of over there.
Yeah.
So I didn't start it that long after Lynn started his journey.
This is Lin-Manuel Miranda, the creator of Hamilton, in which you played Aaron Burr, the first Aaron Burr in London, and remarkable you were as in that role, I must say.
Thank you very much. It was interesting when I came to do it, is that actually I knew a lot about the period because I had been researching it for The Meaning of Zong.
Yes.
So, but you have this incredible decade where at the beginning of it you have the American Revolution, which is absolutely entrenched in the idea of human rights and liberty and freedom. And then at the end of that decade, you have the French Revolution, equally so. And in the middle of it, you have this Zong story, which for me, absolutely in one kind of series of events, really encapsulates the idea of human rights and the extraordinary wealth that was being created and these empires that were being created. So you have this kind of dramatic pull with the story. So I thought that it's something which is which speaks to now for me anyway.
And I mean, how does one set about writing one's first major play? Which it's a fairly challenging piece of work. I mean, the technical challenges of it are quite big.
Well, that's what I like about theatre.
Yeah,
I like theatre which with Shakespeare's was where I start off, and Shakespeare has no qualms about going, okay, now we're in Agincourt, now we're in London, now we're here, now we're there. So for me, it was the obvious thing to go, this needs to happen in the theatre. So what I initially started out doing was going, okay, let me just grab all of the existing material, verbatim material, because all the key players in the story have sort of written their own stories. So Olaudah Equiano is he published his memoir in the late 1780s, and it's gone on to become a massively important, one of the first so-called slave narratives published. Granville Sharp has also written his life story. The Zong hearing itself that the play focuses on was documented. Olaudah and Granville Sharp go in, take a shorthand writer into Westminster Hall and document the whole thing. So the first thing I did was went down to the Maritime Museum, Greenwich, and they bring out this 200-year-old book in white gloves and in plastic in a box and stuff, but you can't touch it. And there it is. This 200-year-old handwriting.
Yes.
There's huge players in it, and they've all written this stuff. So I tried to bring as much of that as I could. And then I was like, right, I'm going to do it verbatim. I'll go to the National. When I started it, Nick Hyton was running the building. So I spoke to him, and he said, okay, well, have some space. And then at a certain point, Tom Morris, who's my co-director, got involved, and he was like, okay, now you need to sort of make the sort of leap in terms of writing this yourself and filling in the gaps. I was also very interested in going onto the ship and finding out the story from the people who experienced this. And we know that during this 3-day massacre, it transpires, we find out from the affidavit of the first mate in the hearing that one of the Africans who was thrown overboard into the sea managed to grab hold of a rope, in his words, grab hold of a rope, and there clung on by his bare hands and managed to pull himself back up.
Extraordinary.
So when I saw that, I was like, okay, that's theatre, that's drama. It's like, what are you going to do in that situation?
It's literally Dyllón Deep Blue Sea, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's been a difficult process.
Yes.
Over the years, we sort of workshopped it quite a lot. We've had a lot of readings,
yes,
as any good piece of theatre should have. And we performed it last year, and it was received really well. So, and
it was performed at that time. Tom was running Bristol Old Vic, wasn't he? We should probably mention Tom Morris was the co-director of Warhorse as well. That's what he's primarily or chiefly known for. Was it important or significant to put it on at Bristol because that became such a sort of flashpoint with the downing of the Edward Colston statue?
Yeah, of
a way of discussing the legacy of the slave trade.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing Tom said was right. I mean, you mentioned Warhorse. I was like, the person who directed Warhorse is definitely the person who could come up with how to tell this story. At one point, I knew that this ship, the Zong, would come crashing into Westminster Hall where the hearing was happening. So when he read that, he was like, okay, I want to make a piece of theatre out of that. Yeah. How are we going to do that?
Yeah.
And then the second thing he said was like, okay, we need to take this play to the 4 major slave trading cities in the UK historically. So they were Liverpool, and then Glasgow and London.
Yeah.
So that was the initial plan. Even before I'd really got into the writing, he said, we need to take this to those cities. Because in his experience, Bristol was going some way to having a reckoning and a conversation with itself about its history, but there was still a long way to go.
Yes.
And that's what we did. Last year we went to Bristol, and then we went to Edinburgh in the end, and then came down to Liverpool, and then back to Bristol.
And it's kind of fascinating that you're doing it in the Barbican, so you're doing it in the City of London.
My hope is that you might just be interested in finding out something like the tearing down of the Colston statue, whether one agrees with it or not. At least it starts a conversation and makes people interested in who are these people that I'm walking by and what is their legacy, what have they done.
Yeah.
So for me, I'd like to, people to watch Downton Abbey and go, okay, well, where is that money coming from?
How was that house built?
Yes. Well, how was that house built?
Yeah.
I think it's important. I've visited a lot of those kind of homes, stately homes and castles. And you go, yeah, and yet there isn't really a conversation about it in the way which I think is useful to people going, okay, what's our version of that now?
Yes. Yeah. It's interesting. There's been a weird sort of collective act of sort of willful forgetting, hasn't there, or neglect, I think, about the legacy of slavery, and sort of combined one, which I think the play touches on as well, about how multicultural certainly London and particularly major trading cities always were. I'm so glad you brought that up. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that you, as well as Olado in this, there's numerous other historical black figures who feature in the play or who are mentioned in the play. Yeah. Ignatius Sancho is mentioned at one point as well. Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned Joseph is writing about at the moment, isn't he?
Exactly, and I cannot wait to read his book. Something, again, I didn't know was just the extent to which there was a large, thriving black community in London at the time. In fact, we all tend to know about that first abolitionist committee that got together. It was William Wilberforce and Thomas Clarkson and
Amazing Grace and all that stuff.
All of that. But we don't know, or I didn't know, is that a couple of years before that, the black community got together. The Sons of Africa, and they were organised, and they were very much aligned with the Quakers, who were doing a huge amount to combat slavery at the time. So our story takes place at the beginning of the bringing together of those organisations. Yeah. But there was a black presence in London at the time, again, which we don't know about. A lot of the time I'm in plays and people go, oh, well, there weren't black people there and stuff. And it's like, there were black people from the Elizabethan time. So there have been black people in this country for a long time. And it's interesting, again, to try and tell that story.
Thank you very much for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me.
And The Meaning of Zong is at the Barbican Theatre.
Right, well, we sneak backstage at this wonderful theatre. Let's go to another very quick ad break.
In the meantime, why not hit subscribe so you never miss an episode?
Hi, I'm Matthew Modine, and you're listening to the Evening Standard Theatre Podcast.
Welcome back to the Evening Standard Theatre Podcast.
Should we get into our second review?
Yes, it's Sea Creatures at Hampstead Theatre Downstairs.
So this is just under 2 hours straight through. Story of a family of women living by the sea and a young man who comes to visit them, expecting his partner to be there. She's one of the daughters, but she is not there when he arrives. It's by Cordelia Lynn. It's her first play at Hampstead. And I don't know,
It's not just about a family by the sea, is it? It's sort of weirdly of women by the sea. They're a community, really, rather than a straightforward family. It seems like some of the daughters are optional people who've just turned up. They may be sort of selkies, they may be mermaids. There's a sort of folkloric element through the whole thing, isn't there? A slightly mystical element about the sea being a goddess, I'm guessing.
To be honest, I really wanted to like this. So I remember you didn't like it, and I thought it sounded terrible when I read a review. And then a friend said that, oh, I've seen loads of people on Instagram saying that's great. And I sort of wondered why. And she said, oh, well, it's mainly middle-aged women. I thought, well, I'll probably like it then. Let's see. And I'm struggling to see the point, to be honest.
I'm struggling to see the point. And the last play of Cordelia Lynn's that I saw was Love and Other Acts of Violence at the Donmar Warehouse, which similarly was straight through, I think about 90 minutes long, but felt like it had at least 3 plays in it, none of them finished, or none of them sort of complete, and I slightly felt that with this one.
I was a bit sort of lost, and I read the text afterwards on the way home, and the idea is that it's a play about, or at least it came from the idea of being a play about someone's absence.
Yes.
But for me, that didn't really come through, because none of the women are rememely surprised by the non-appearance of the absent character. So
she's
you
called
sort
Robin,
of don't
isn't
feel
she?
her lack.
No,
she's called Robin. She's certainly somebody's daughter. The only person who seems to feel the lack of her is Mark, her partner. I don't know, that part of it sort of got lost in it for me.
Yeah, there's a sense at one point that she's sort of evaporated, Robin, as well, that she hasn't disappeared or been abducted, but she's sort of recombined with the elements somehow.
Yeah, which slightly undercuts the stakes. A bit, actually. And I feel like motherhood and care, okay, they're definitely a theme, aren't they? One of the characters, Shirley, is a brilliant academic who's had 2 or 3 daughters, again, hard to tell. One of them might be a Selkie, who knows. More or less on her own. I think one of the fathers is just sort of dismissed as the last sperm donor, which was, I thought, a nice line. And she has sort of, popped the kids in a drawer because that's the easiest, that she didn't have the money for a cot, and she's carried on with her career, and that's all fine. But I'm not sure it really provided much in the way of insights except for kind of, you can be an objectively neglectful mother
Yeah.
and still be loving and have children who love you, but the only person whose kind of response to life seems to have been extreme is the missing Robin. And it's clear that if that person is a real person, that person has a serious mental illness, and
Yes.
it's not just about being sort of, put in a drawer as a baby.
It's also, we should also say, it's not just about the sort of physical loss of someone as a presence. It's about the possibility that Shirley has some form of dementia and is losing
there's
her
that
mind.
as well, of
And
course.
there's the sort of lack within the relationship. Her partner is played by Tusita Jayasundara, who I love as an actress.
I thought they were all good.
Yeah, they're
actually.
really. I mean, it's a terrific cast. Geraldine Alexander plays Shirley, and the younger actors are extremely good as well. But Tusita Jayasundara's character complains about the lack of sort of commitment in the relationship and the sort of sexual indifference, or the fact that she doesn't really feel she's really there. And there's a constant sense that nobody really knows anything about anybody else.
Yeah.
Like, they keep talking about her painting. She's an artist, of course. There's there's an academic and an artist, and it's all a bit bourgeois and annoying. But a lot of it, I kept saying, this sort of the setup starts a bit like a sort of Escape to the Country, by this lovely light field thing with the sound of the waves crashing outside. Of course, you may be invaded by selkies and mermaids, but that's
That's
the
part
price
of the
you pay
course,
for
isn't
this
it? Yeah,
view.
exactly.
Yeah, it's there's all this talk about her painting lobsters. She endlessly paints lobsters, and at the end she says, actually, no, I've never painted a lobster.
Yeah, you
And
never
yet-
really know what's true, but that sort
Yeah.
of doesn't wrong foot you. It just makes you confused, which
Yet
sounds
there
like it's the
are
same thing, but it's not.
two mechanical lobsters which then scuttle across
my
the
God.
floor halfway through, and you just think,
Everybody
what
in that
the-
audience is like, WTF?
Yes.
What is happening? It was.
normally love an animal.
I know, but it was so
Normally
incongruous
bring on
because
a dog or a car,
Yes.
and it's
Yeah.
fine.
they ought to look. They don't even look really like. Quite a few people were whispering, "What is it? What is it?"
Yeah,
And
they're sort
someone
of
was going,
metallic,
"I think it's a lobster," which was
crawling.
totally distracting. Nobody was listening to anything anybody was saying on stage.
One of them got stuck the night I was
Oh,
there, so
God.
the stage management person had to come on and retrieve it from the bottom of the table.
Lobster handler.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, and actually, the lobster handler waved goodbye to the last lobster this time. It was really sweet. I'm not sure he was meant to, but it was a really nice touch. Just about the cast, I'm a big fan of Pearl Chanda, who plays George. George is the eldest daughter of Shirley, and she's very, very pregnant. I was
Yes.
interested in her character because she's very pregnant and she really doesn't want
She's
to be.
furiously
She's
pregnant.
absolutely livid. And I think that's a really interesting struggle to see on stage, just engaging in this desperate self-sabotage of drinking and smoking constantly.
Yeah.
And I didn't find it shocking. I found it sad. I thought that was really quite touching.
How was Tom Mothersdale? Because he played Richard III rather brilliantly once.
So he plays Mark. He was pretty good. I feel like it was funny actually because Cordelia Lynn in the programme writes about how she did know someone or go on a date with someone or something who kind of aggressively cooked at her and then tried to tell her how to iron a shirt. But when you put that guy on stage, he just can't be that awful. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
those people do exist,
So he
but
does-
it somehow doesn't quite ring true.
He
even
intrudes
though
on
it
this
probably
house of
is
women
exactly like that.
Yeah, and mansplains everything to them and tries to take over the cooking, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That's the thing. That's all he really does as a character,
Yeah.
and then sort of complain about the lack of Robin, and the women seem magnificently unbothered about the
Yeah,
fact that she's not there.
exactly.
So,
Yeah.
but he's good. He was in Love and Other Acts of Violence as well, and he
Mm.
was terrific in that. Even though again that left me asking more questions than it answered. I think, just like this one.
I'm normally like a massive sucker for the whole kind of like mystery of the sea, English folkloric, selky stuff. Like I usually love that shit. But
I'm there for the selkies as well.
yeah, totally. But if you're gonna do that, it really needs to add something. And it felt like I was watching two plays, a bit like what you were saying about Love and Other Acts of Violence.
Yeah.
Actually, it felt like you were watching two different things, more than one different thing, they weren't somehow quite connecting.
Yeah. I was interested. Cordelia Lynn said she doesn't really plan plays in the interview in the programme. She says
Right.
that she just sort of sits down, writes, and then waits until she's finished, and then she goes, oh, it's stopped. And I think one can sort of see that slightly on stage. Quick mention for the older actors, Tony Turner, June Watson, who were sort of wheeled on to be quirky briefly
Oh,
and then
God,
wheeled
yeah.
off again. And ages ago I did an interview with David Hare where he said he would no longer write a play where a waiter came in and said, your taxi's here, madam, or something.
Yeah.
But this is the equivalent. You've got June Watson, who's one of the greatest actors on our stage and who I think is now in her 90s.
Yeah.
And she's just sort of literally, just shoved on to deliver this monologue about being a sort of
About being
sea
a selkie,
creature
isn't
wife.
It?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
exactly.
to a sort of
It's
fisherman
basically
who ruined
here is
her.
here is a folkloric myth that I am going to deliver as a first-person monologue. It just feels really odd, and it doesn't. I don't know, you're just like, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Which is then what everyone else pretty much says on stage.
It's interesting that these two plays that we talked about this week, this and Black Superhero, are at our premier new writing venues, although Hampstead has been quite troubled, where Sea Creatures is on because it's lost its Arts Council England grant and it's then lost its artistic director Roxana Silbert. But I think for a long time it's felt that dramaturgy has been lacking somewhat, not to go all Succession on you, but dramaturgically I think this has been lacking somewhat in Hampstead recently, that a lot of these plays that we're seeing could do with a bit more work or a bit more time.
As I say, some of the writing is really nice.
Yeah.
Like, if you listen carefully, you can glean a lot of information about the characters that isn't dragged out in explication. She doesn't do explication, which is like we were talking about earlier with Black Superhero. She doesn't do that. She doesn't do, apart from the monologue about being a seal. You know, her writing is actually quite economical in its sentences. So you work out where Mark and Robin met through one throwaway line, and you're like, oh, now I know who you are.
Yeah.
There's a lot of text as opposed to all text, but I don't know. At the end of the play, the woman in front of me leaned over to her friend and said, I've got no effing idea what just happened, which I sort of think is fair.
Yeah. And I suppose, there's an argument to be made that one shouldn't always be able to totally understand theatre. There's something to be said for theatre that casts a spell or, lulls you somehow.
No. It just made me go, oh, that was an hour and 50 minutes, which felt a little bit longer.
Yeah. It's very well designed and lit. And
the
soundscape and the lighting is wonderful.
Yeah, it is. It's gorgeous, actually. It looks beautiful. And I do think the actors are fantastic.
Yeah.
I just didn't. I came out of it without feeling anything much, really. I didn't have my equilibrium altered, and that's not. You need that.
Silky lovers only, is it?
I think that's illegal, isn't it?
Sea Creatures is at the Hampstead Theatre until April 29th.
That's it for this week's episode of the Evening Standard Theatre Podcast. Big thanks to Giles Terera for joining us.
Yes, and do make sure to go back and listen to some of our previous interviews and reviews. We've met Matthew Modine, Jenna Coleman, Daniel Mays and Marisha Wallace, loads of great people.
And you can find all our reviews and news online at standard.co.uk.
If you haven't yet done so, hit follow or subscribe so you'll always be reminded when a new episode drops in.
It's as easy as that.
Exactly.
See you next Sunday.
Right, we better get out of here. There's a show on, isn't there?
Oh.
Yeehaw.